Liz Truss to be Prime Minister, and many of whom simply, I think, have not really fully got behind her after that election result within the party membership. There's a tug of war going on between the ideas of the backbench Conservatives, the ideas of the frontbench Conservatives, and the ideas and the votes of the Conservative Party members. It's a really intractable situation, and clearly what has happened now is that many members of Parliament have simply looked at the polls as they stand and thought something has to change. And it's been the most remarkable 3 hours in Westminster, with rumours swirling now that the government is seriously considering U-turning on one of the key planks of Liz Truss's election campaign, which was to cancel the proposed tax rise to British businesses that Rishi Sunak was planning. Of course, the mini-budget did follow through on that campaign commitment, that big point of differentiation between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, that she would cancel that tax rise, and that she did. Well, now it sounds like Number 10 and especially the Treasury are seriously considering cancelling or indeed uncancelling that tax rise, going ahead with raising taxes on British businesses at the time of facing a recession. The most remarkable situation that, frankly, backbench MPs of the Conservative Party are cheering for. We're through the looking glass on tax.
OK. How much of this budget does Labour actually really oppose, though?
Yeah, this is a really, really key point, because there are around 7 major fiscal measures within this budget. And yesterday I spoke with Sir Keir Starmer's official spokesperson, going through which ones the Labour Party opposes and which ones the Labour Party supports. Now, the biggest single measure is, of course, that energy price guarantee, that fixing of prices so that the average household doesn't pay more than £2,500 a year on energy. Now, that could cost up to £150 billion. The Labour Party supports it, the largest fiscal measure in that mini-budget. The second largest was the reversal of the increase to national insurance contributions, and that costs around 18 or 19 billion pounds. Now, the Labour Party supports that too. The third largest is the cancellation of that corporation tax rise. Now, that's the first thing that the Labour Party opposes. And then there are some of the smaller measures. So, for example, the reduction in the basic rate of tax, that costs around £5 billion. The Labour Party supports that as well. So of the top 4 most expensive measures, the Labour Party supports 3 of them. And then there are a few other things, a couple of billion on what's called IR35 reform, a couple of billion on stamp duty. Now, the Labour Party opposes the stamp duty changes, but on the other little things is unclear on that policy. In fact, when it comes to what the Labour Party has explicitly opposed in this mini-budget, the fiscal measures it explicitly opposes, it's only 2 of them. It's the stamp duty changes and the cancellation to the business tax rise.
So if this budget was going to absolutely crush the economy, then presumably the same thing would happen if the opposition was in charge. Tom, thank you very much. Tom Harwood there, our political correspondent at Westminster. Well, look, there's kind of 3 core themes running through this show today, ladies and gentlemen. We've got the political chaos, or frankly, just what's going on. We're also going to be monitoring the situation when it comes to sending people to Rwanda. As it currently stands, we might as well have put Ryanair in charge of those flights, because nothing's taken off yet or reached its destination. And we're looking at record waiting times for our NHS. 7 million people waiting for routine treatment. Isn't it time we just gave everyone in the NHS a pay rise? But back to the politics. How much pressure is Liz Truss actually under? Is it
newspapers to suggest that the Prince Charles, sorry, here we go again. The King was expressing a political view point at all. I don't think he was. I think he was being self-deprecating. I've seen him do this before, where he says, "Oh, you've got to come and see me. Oh, never mind. It's a pity." And I think that's what he.
I just can't believe that they're even still particularly relevant. I suppose, Kinsey. What are they doing? What are they up to these days?
I mean, what they're up to these days is, Meghan continues to release these podcasts where she hints that the people that are her guests are going to unload their past trauma, but then Meghan brings it all back to her. Don't worry. I'm sorry that you were suicidal, but let me talk about myself for a second. So we're continuing to release podcasts. I'm sorry, but I am still hearing that Harry wrote a very nasty publication about his family, and he's trying to pull it all back at the last minute because he's so stressed about it now. He's reconsidered things. And so, yeah, Harry and Meghan are still here. They're still house hunting. They're releasing podcasts, and they're talking negatively about their in-laws.
Yeah, Kinsey, I would absolutely hate to be, at my absolute wit's end and have only Meghan Markle as the comforter. Like, Meghan, I've just really had enough here. I'm just really struggling with everything. I've got so much on. I'm struggling to just get out of bed in the mornings. Yeah, I can relate because actually I'm struggling to sell my $50 million mansion. All right, both of you, thank you very, very much. That is Royal and Showbiz reporter Kinsey Schofield and our very own King Charles. Charles Ray, the former royal correspondent for The Sun. Great stuff. Right, now, moving on. The Chancellor has already reversed his plans to abolish the top rate of income tax, which were part of the mini-budget. But reports suggest another U-turn could be looming. Speaking in Washington, Kwasi Kwarteng said, "My total focus is on delivering the mini-budget and making sure that we get growth back into our economy." How has today's events actually affected the economy and the market? Joining me now to give us his analysis, live, by the way, from Amsterdam, is GBNews' economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, it's no surprise that they didn't let me go to Amsterdam, but it's great to have you from there. What's the latest then for us?
Well, I am here in Amsterdam, Patrick. I'm here at a conference that's all about Bitcoin, the world's most important cryptocurrency. And I'll be talking more about Bitcoin with Nigel Farage, who's also here with me at 7 p.m. tonight on GB News, where we have a kind of cryptocurrency special, which I know is a subject that is of interest to lots of GB News viewers and listeners. But to your immediate question, I think what's happened today is that the government has pretty much signalled now that a U-turn is coming, a reversal, a retreat, if you like, from some of those tax cuts that were outlined in the mini-budget. Now, one of the big tax cuts in the mini-budget, the reduction in the rate of national insurance, that's already gone through, that's already law. They've already reversed, as well as you said, the reduction in the top rate of income tax from 45 to 40 pence. That's not going to go ahead. That was seen as politically quite tin-eared, a bit cack-handed in the middle of the cost of living crisis by a lot of Conservative backbenchers and, of course, by the Labour Party too. What's really up for grabs now and in play is the reversal, keep up, in Rishi Sunak's increase in corporation tax. So Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, wanted to increase corporation tax paid by all firms if they make over a certain amount of turnover each year from 19 to 25%. Liz Truss wanted to keep that at 19%, as did the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. It may be that that isn't now frozen at 19%. There are signs from Downing Street that they are preparing a partial reversal of the mini-budget, and the markets have basically already priced that in. We've seen the pound gain strength over the last couple of hours. We've seen government borrowing costs come down on financial markets, which impacts other borrowing costs, not least mortgages and personal loans. So unless we do now get a reversal, a partial reversal of this mini-budget, we're going to see more market turmoil. If they do deliver on this reversal of the mini-budget, a partial reversal, then the market should stay calm.
Absolutely. Just very quickly, Liam, before I move on to NHS waiting times, what's been the best thing about Amsterdam for you?
Well, Bitcoin really is, in my view, in some sense is the future of money. It's a cryptocurrency. It's often derided by establishment economists, many mainstream broadcasters. I've been seriously interested in Bitcoin since it first emerged in 2009, 2010. And believe you me, Patrick, as inflation rises, as central banks around the world print more and more money, Bitcoin is a currency that no one can create more of. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. And that's why a lot of people here think that cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, their timing's now coming, given the increase of inflation across the Western world.
Good stuff, Liam. Thank you very much, and well done as well with that. Liam Halligan, there, GBNews economics and business editor. Managing to put a modern take on Amsterdam. Right, the number of people now, moving away from that, the number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has reached a record high. Get your head around these numbers. 7 million people were waiting at the end of August. 7 million, according to figures released by NHS England today. That's up from 6.8 million in July, right? And it's the highest number since records began in 2007. Meanwhile, the number of people waiting more than a year has now reached 387,000. Can you imagine? Maybe you can imagine. Maybe it's you. Get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Waiting more than a year. And people go, oh, well, you know, it's not anything serious. Well, something that starts off as not particularly serious can very quickly get serious, certainly over the course of a year. And pain, people with a dodgy hip, for example. The NHS might not think it's urgent, but I bet you certainly do. The government and NHS England want to eliminate all waits of more than a year by March 2025. But for those waiting right now, their treatment obviously can't come soon enough. I'm joined now by Dr. Shirin Lakhani, who is a private intimate health specialist and former NHS GP. Thank you very much for joining me. Dr. Lakhani, I believe, is there, and certainly, hopefully, will be very, very shortly. Anyway, I'd like to know what your reaction is to these record waiting list times for routine hospital treatment. Ah, there you go.
Hello.
Hello, how are you? 7 million people. It's a huge amount of people. Why is it happening?
It's absolutely shocking, isn't it? But the thing with NHS is that it's been under pressure for many, many years. And the problems in it have been accelerated by the issues with the pandemic. Unfortunately, there are huge staffing shortages in the NHS, so it's struggling to cope with demand.
Okay, is it all about staffing shortages, though? Because these waiting times appear to have been kind of steadily increasing over a good number of years. Is it maybe about having too many patients?
There is that as well, because as we know, our population is ageing and the population is growing. So the demands on our health service are growing as well. Add to that the years of underfunding, the poor working conditions in the NHS, and you've got a perfect storm.
Is it years of underfunding? Because funding goes up every year pretty much, doesn't it?
Not to meet the demands of the NHS. As I said, we've got an ageing population. Actually, it's not only that, people's conditions are more complex now as well. So when the NHS was first introduced, it was free at the point of service. But the conditions, the chronic conditions that it has to deal with didn't exist at the time. So people are living longer, they're sicker. And even though the money goes up, it's not going up in line with what's actually needed.
So how much of our GDP do you reckon we need to spend on the NHS to make it work for us?
I'm not an economist, I can't answer that. But having worked in the NHS, it runs on the goodwill of the staff, and it has done even in the years since I became a doctor. There's always been shortages, it's consistently underfunded, and we just can't keep up with the demand.
Yeah, I had a guy on from the BMA yesterday who was their representative of consultants, and he was saying that they all wanted a pay rise, and he didn't know how much they were paid, and he didn't know what they wanted to be paid. It turns out, I did a bit of research afterwards, they start on about 80-odd grand and work their way up to about 130 grand and stuff. And do you think in a cost of living crisis, realistically now, it is all about NHS underfunding, or are there some elements of the NHS that are just jumping on the bandwagon?
We're not just talking about consultants. If you look at junior NHS staff, they're paid pretty poorly compared to other sectors. Take a look at doctors, for example, when they first start, compared to what they can earn in the private sector, it is grossly underfunded. And you want to attract people into the profession as well. To get to a consultant level, and not everyone gets to those levels of pay, you have to work for decades in really poor conditions. So it's
Would it be easier, do you think, if we just privatised the whole thing?
No, because at the end of the day, not everyone could afford it. And you look at privatised systems and they've all got their failings. The NHS in principle is an absolute gem, but the way it's been funded and the way it's been managed has led to it being in the condition it's in.
There are a lot of nurses and doctors that are leaving our NHS to go and work in other countries' health services.
I can't comment on that. I'm sorry, I don't know. But I know.
Are there other countries that are
leaving?
Yeah, there are other countries that have got a much better healthcare service than us, because it just seemed to me as though we keep attracting people from other countries to come and work in our one, and I just wondered if their ones were better. Why don't they stay there?
I think you have to look at the value of the currencies in those countries as well. So it's very difficult to comment on why people leave their country to come and work in the UK. But if you look at the UK workforce, they're leaving because of the poor conditions. Most voters are understaffed. Most people are working far more than they should be.
Yeah, I just find it hard to get my head around the fact that if they want to train in a medical setting and they leave their country's own medical settings, they can earn more money here, but then obviously the money and the conditions aren't good enough here. Maybe it's just a problem around the world with medical professions. I don't know, maybe that's what it is. But thank you very much. Dr. Shirin Lakhani, their private intimate health specialist and former NHS GP. Well, there we go. GB Views at GBNews. .uk. Right, ladies and gentlemen, moving away from that now. A court has heard this afternoon that a nurse accused of murdering babies on a neonatal ward cared deeply for those that she had to look after. Lucy Letby is charged with killing 7 babies and attempting to murder 10 others at Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015 and 2016, outlining Miss Letby's defence. Ben Myers KC said that she was a dedicated nurse and in no way did she want to harm them. She denies all 12 charges. GB News' North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper is following the trial at Manchester Crown Court for us.
The defence has now begun their opening in the Lucy Letby trial here at Manchester Crown Court. The former nurse has been charged with the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of a further 10 babies while she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She denies all of the charges against her. Now, in the prosecution's conclusion this morning, the jury heard that upon searching her home, the police had found a piece of paper which said things like, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. I am a horrible, evil person and the world is better off without me." Now, the jury was shown an image of this note, which also said things like, "I'll never have children or marry. I'll never know what it's like to have a family." The words "not good enough" were underlined at the top, and the word "hate" was in capital letters and circled several times. And then at the bottom of the note, there were 6 words together: "I am evil, I did it." Now, once the prosecution had concluded, the defence began their opening here at Manchester Crown Court. Ben Myers KC told the jury they must be calm and they cannot let emotion overtake reason in this case. He also said Lucy Letby did her best to take care of the babies she was put in charge of. He said in no way did she want to harm them, and he also described her as a dedicated nurse who loved her job. He then turned to discuss the notes that the prosecution had put forward and pointed out a part of the note where Ms. Letby had written, "I didn't do anything wrong." He also put to the jury that sometimes people just scribble things down when they are upset. Throughout the entirety, though, the defence maintained that Lucy Letby is not guilty.
Sophie, thank you very much. Sophie Reaper there outside Manchester Crown Court, bringing you the very latest on what is an incredibly gripping case, isn't it? Well, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the increasing political pressure on Liz Truss. Greg says, let's be honest, the mandates the Tories were voted in 2019 don't really exist now. Seeing as the aftermath of the pandemic and the financial mess we are in didn't exist, and to this extent Boris Johnson got into office. I think basically what he's trying to say there is that, yes, OK, all right, I suppose the manifesto that the Tories won the 80-odd seats on, plus the person that was in charge of that manifesto and standing for office, neither of those two things really exist, and maybe the landscape in the world has indeed changed. Yes, I can understand that. Maybe in that case it is time for a general election. And on the NHS issue. So this is something that really, really winds me up, right? 7 million people are now waiting for routine NHS care. 7 million. I mean, and the thing is, people go, oh, that's whatever percentage of our population. Yeah, well, loads of people go private, OK? So it's not even 7 million people out of our entire population waiting for routine NHS care. It's a higher proportion than that. NHS is underfunded. This is from Chris. You've got to be joking. £80,000 per year for diversity officers. It's ridiculous. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, we currently live in a country where it is much more deadly for you to get seriously ill at the weekend, right? This is not, I'm sorry, but this is bonkers, OK? And you look at the amount that consultants get, etc., and they still want more money. I'm not having it. Anyway, India says the NHS is not underfunded. It is, however, poorly managed and money is spent unwisely. Start spending the money better and things will fall into place. Part of me does wonder whether or not it's time for Labour to come into power, because when they also cannot possibly give the bottomless pit that is our NHS enough money, and they still say that it's underfunded, then maybe it will show it for what it is. But in the next hour, we will be asking, is it time to force a general election? Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are under increasing pressure to reverse their tax-cutting plans to help restore confidence in the government's economic plans. I've been asking, with the government, let's be honest, struggling a bit, OK? And we're hearing noises from behind the scenes as well. Some Tory MPs are saying, oh, should we bring back Boris? Well, it's a bit late for that because you biffed Boris and now he's starting to look like he might have been a decent choice to stick around. Who should we replace him with? Rishi Sunak, for example, maybe. Penny Mordaunt walking around like a bulldog chewing a wasp. That's her phrase, not mine. That's her own phrase. And we've got all these people there. Some people even say maybe it's time to let Labour have a go so they can deal with the worst of the cost of living crisis. I thought, OK. Do the British public actually want a general election? Let's find out.
Yes, I think a general election would be extremely helpful.
Who would you vote for?
I would vote Keir Starmer.
You would vote Keir Starmer?
I would.
We're not due to have an election for a little while. Why do you want one now?
Well, it's all very confused at the moment. People don't seem to be very happy with the present Prime Minister. Maybe better to get it over with.
Let's give someone else a go at running the country for a bit.
You're just sick of
Somebody you choose to do it.
Oh, so actually, just from a democratic principle, you'd quite like to elect our leader?
Yes, that sounds like a sensible choice, right?
Yes, we should. Why? Definitely. We need to get rid of this ridiculous Tory government now.
Who would you vote for?
Lib Dem.
Yeah.
Why?
I just lost a lot of trust in the Conservatives. I think they don't really know what they're doing.
If they had a new leader again,
yeah,
but maybe a better one, would you consider voting for them, or are you just done with the Tories?
I'd probably vote for Labour, but hopefully that's why I won the general election, because hopefully Labour would get in.
No.
Yeah, why not?
Why not? Because I'm just bored with that kind of thing at the moment, don't you think?
Yes.
Just want them to get on and govern.
Do you think Truss needs to be given a bit of a chance?
Yes, but she's messing it up, isn't she? Yeah, I mean, she's been in it for a few weeks. I would give her a bit longer, but yeah, the Tories are in all sorts of problems at the moment.
Well, there we go. OK, that was the view of the British public. How do you feel, though? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Should we have a general election? Frankly, are you just sick and tired of the whole thing? Do you think that the Conservatives need to just get behind their leader? It is fascinating. We spoke earlier on to Tom Harwood. For all this talk, our political correspondent Tom Harwood, for all this talk of chaos and economic plans driving the country's economy off a cliff, actually, it turns out, it emerges, that of the 7 key economic pledges that the Tories have put forward, Labour hardly actually disagree with any of them in practice. Interesting stuff, that, isn't it? Lots more to come here on GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Truss under pressure. We'll bring you the latest from Rwanda as well. Well, crucially not from Rwanda, because apparently nobody can actually go there at the minute, but about Rwanda. The King's Coronation. Is it time to call that general election? And 7 million of you good, fair people are apparently on an NHS waiting list. When will it end? But first, it's the weather. I hope it's not raining. I think it might tip me over the edge.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Many places having a fine day today. There will be sunny spells over the next few days, but there's also going to be bands of showers whizzing through on a fairly brisk breeze, particularly across northern areas. A couple of weather fronts moving in tonight. These ones close to the south as well, but say most places have been between these weather systems today. so it's a fine evening for many. But the cloud and rain is pushing in across the central belt of Scotland, and then another line of rain coming into the Highlands and across Northern Ireland through the night. A few showers likely across Wales and southwest England, but much of England and Wales is having a dry night. Not as chilly as last night. We'll easily drop down into single figures in some towns and cities, but many places staying well above freezing. Certainly, as I said, a lot milder than last night. As we go into Friday, it's a bit of a mess, really. Lots of cloud in the south with outbreaks of rain working their way from west to east. At the same time, a line of rain spreading from southern Scotland into northern England. Behind that, plenty of heavy showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but some brighter spells. Much of northeast England, North Wales having a dry and a fine day again. Temperatures in the south close to average. A fresher feel, though, across Scotland and Northern Ireland with a brisk wind. Much of that rain tends to shimmy out of the way during Friday night and into Saturday. So quite a few of us, certainly in the east, will start the weekend dry. But here comes another line of rain, quite heavy rain as well. But it does move through pretty rapidly during Saturday morning. But a wet spell for northern England and Scotland, some blustery winds again across the northwest. And then we're left with sunshine and showers for many during Saturday afternoon. Again, those showers tending to zip through on a fairly brisk wind, and temperatures close to average across the south, a bit fresh further north. So low pressure dominating, bands of showers zipping through during the weekend with some brighter spells in between. This low could bring some more persistent rain on Sunday.
I've always put my family first. That's why I've chosen a pure cremation plan. It's a fuss-free, less expensive alternative to a traditional funeral. When I'm gone, I don't want them to worry about money. I want them to celebrate my life in their own way. They could do something that's fun, something that's me. A pure cremation means no fuss. Everything's sorted in advance, and the prepaid plan takes away the stress and cost of organising a traditional funeral. Their fuss-free cremation service is a less expensive option, and you can pay for it all up front.
Pure Cremation provides the UK's best-selling plan. It's paid for in advance with no hidden costs guaranteed. Join the thousands of people choosing Pure Cremation every month. Rated excellent on Trustpilot with over 10,000 reviews. Call to request your free guide now on 0800 130 3310 or visit purecremation.tv.
Lots of people ask, what is equity release? How does it work? Is the money tax-free? So, let me explain. Equity release is another form of mortgage. The main type is a lifetime mortgage. You take a tax-free lump sum to enjoy, pay off any existing mortgage, and with a lifetime mortgage, interest rates are fixed for life. Speak to a fully qualified advisor at the UK's #1 equity release specialist, Age Partnership. Or visit agepartnership.co.uk to find out how much you can release.
Yo, hey, what's up? What's up? Everything, apparently. So we've got to get the bills down. What are we doing about it?
Well, I'm on my way to save the world since £330 on their car insurance.
Good. Well, 4 marks for the savings, 4 out of 10 for the parking. The rest of you keep focused. Let's start saving people serious money.
Super save on car insurance with Money's Supermarket.
Welcome back, everybody. Just gone 4 p.m. This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, and I'm with you all the way through until 6 o'clock. Coming up, the Prime Minister and her government is under intense pressure to make a U-turn on key aspects of the so-called mini-budget last month. A lot of you are very mixed whether or not you indeed want to see a U-turn. Should Liz stick to her guns? What are her guns? Where are they? But a defiant Chancellor has today said that he will not U-turn and that he is focused on the growth agenda. Bit of Tory turmoil as well, but something else that I think a lot of people want to see done is flights start taking off to Rwanda, because the Rwanda migrant plan is at the High Court today. Are we one step closer to the policy being introduced? Home Secretary Suella Braverman certainly hopes so. Lots of us certainly hope so as well, I'm sure of it. We will be discussing this throughout the programme. And record waiting list for the NHS. This story has really wound me up today. 7 million of you are now waiting for routine NHS care. The NHS It's not working for us. Isn't it time we went outside, clapped and gave them all a pay rise? You might as well just treat yourself at this point. Hire a shaman, hire a witch doctor, buy some healing crystals. Pretty much everyone in the NHS wants a pay rise, yet 7 million people can't get basic care. But we can't possibly reform or privatise the whole thing because that would be nuts. If you're waiting, get in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But before that, it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Hello to you. The Chancellor is insisting his focus is on delivering the mini budget right now, amid reports the government is about to U-turn on the new measures. That's after some Tory members of the 1922 committee urged Prime Minister Liz Truss to reconsider Kwasi Kwarteng's economic plans. The Bank of England has had to intervene twice to stabilise the markets following the budget. However, that support comes to an end tomorrow. International Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch says it's important that her party works together.
Even talking about changing leaders at this time would be disastrous. We should not be talking about that at all. We should be focusing on what is important for people's lives, for their jobs and for their prosperity. It's time to unite, get behind the Prime Minister and focus on her growth agenda.
The High Court is hearing a second challenge against the government's plan to deport from the UK some illegal migrants to Rwanda. The government says the measures would reduce the numbers of illegals crossing the English Channel, but critics are concerned by Rwanda's human rights record. Asylum Aid, the charity mounting the legal challenge, is arguing that tight timescales are leading to unfairness and are impacting on people's ability to access justice. As you've been hearing, a nurse accused of murdering several babies allegedly wrote notes to herself which read, "I am evil," and another one which said, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough." Prosecutor Nick Johnson Casey told Manchester Crown Court the notes were found following a search of Lucy Letby's home. Letby is charged with murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 10 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital during 2015 and 2016. The 32-year-old denies all allegations. Around £4.5 billion awarded as part of furlough payments during the pandemic was lost through mistakes and fraudulent claims, a public spending watchdog has said. The National Audit Office is criticising the government for not doing enough to check process when it rolled out the scheme, which overall cost the country £97 billion. However, it does say the scheme met its primary objective, to protect British workers and businesses during an extraordinary national health emergency. The government says it's still working to root out those who abuse the system, with HMRC expected to recover £1.1 billion over the next 2 years. Now, the number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen to a new record high. Figures released by NHS England show 7 million people were waiting at the end of August. That's up from 6.8 million in July and is the highest number since records began in 2007. Meanwhile, the number of people waiting more than a year has now reached 387,000. Royal Mail workers are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. The Communication Workers Union says 115,000 members are joining picket lines outside Royal Mail offices. It's one of a series of 19 walkouts planned in protest against various proposals by the company. Royal Mail says the union's action is weakening their financial position, but the CWU General Secretary says Royal Mail is proposing changes which won't improve the overall service.
It's not about modernisation. In fact, it's insulting the intelligence of all postal workers and I think the public and businesses to suggest it's anything other than an asset stripping business plan and a levelling down agenda. And frankly, we're not going to support that.
The Metropolitan Police is to start using data to predict which men in London might be violent towards women and girls. The Met Commissioner says the force is using behavioural data to forecast who could commit violent crimes against the opposite sex. Sir Mark Rowley told a police conference he hopes to stop offenders before they commit crimes. Meanwhile, the force has announced it's currently investigating more than 600 sexual and domestic abuse allegations against its own officers. The Prince and Princess of Wales are visiting the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London today to see how a sports charity is helping to inspire lives. Coach Core, launched by William and Kate in 2012, aims to create the next generation of sports coaches. It's helped more than 750 disadvantaged young people get a coaching apprenticeship. In celebration of the charity's 10th anniversary, the royal couple will meet some of the youngsters and have a taster of the sports on offer. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick Christys.
Welcome back, everybody. This is, of course, GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. A few key themes running through this show. A little bit of government chaos, I suppose you could say. The financial markets, where are they up to? We're also going to be talking a bit about Rwanda. Are we ever going to be able to actually fly somebody over there, or are we just going to employ a load of Ryanair pilots and never take off? And on top of that as well, 7 million of you are apparently not getting routine NHS healthcare. It's going to be covering all of those. Let's start with the political and economic scene first, because this afternoon the Chancellor has insisted the government's position has not changed as he faced pressure to abandon more elements of the mini-budget, which has caused market turmoil. The Chancellor said he was totally focused on delivering the tax-cutting plans, which are aimed at increasing UK economic growth. Financial markets appear to have picked up now on the speculation that the government were looking to U-turn on the plans in order to demonstrate a commitment to balancing the books, but it looks as though they are holding firm. Joining me now to give his analysis live from Amsterdam, which means I've been to Amsterdam more times than I actually even went when I was at university now, is GBNews economics and business editor Liam Halligan. Liam, great stuff. What's the speculation around a U-turn at the minute? What will it mean for markets?
Well, there has been a lot of turbulence today, Patrick. The government borrowing costs on the 10-year gilts market, crikey, who knew that we'd be so focused on that here on GB News over so many days. The borrowing costs are pretty much where they were this morning at about 4.2%. They went up above 4.5% in the aftermath of that mini-budget, though the Bank of England has been buying debt on the market in order to keep those borrowing costs down. Those borrowing costs, of course, ripple across the economy. The pound has gained a little bit more. It's back at $1.12, but that's because there is widespread speculation now that the government will U-turn on part of its mini-budget. One of the main aspects of the mini-budget, lowering national insurance for employers and employees, that has actually gone through Parliament. That is now the law. That will happen. Of course, the top rate of tax, the reduction on that has been shelved. That's quite embarrassing for Liz Truss and her Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. What's in play now is whether or not the government is going to keep corporation tax where it is, or if it's going to actually increase corporation tax to try and raise more revenue in order to fill a hole in the budget. And the speculation now, and the markets are reacting to the speculation, is that the government will freeze that increase in corporation tax. So we'll have to see.
Yes, indeed, we will. Liam, thank you very, very much. Great to have you back on the show. Yes, again, enjoy Amsterdam, enjoy the old Bitcoin conference. Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor. Joining me now is Andrew Pearce, a man who I'm reliably informed has never even been to Amsterdam, consultant editor at the Daily Mail. Andrew, I believe we can bring you up on the TV at some point soon. There he is. Right, look, that's the economic issue, right? The political turmoil. I mean, I'm even hearing that some Conservative backbench MPs are saying, give it over, let Labour have their time in power, because everything has gone to pot. Let them knacker it and then we can come back in. Is there any truth to that?
I think there's probably one or two renegades who do say that sort of thing, Patrick, but most Tory MPs are focused on one very clear pressing issue. They don't want their P45, because if there was a general election in 3 or 4 weeks' time, I'm afraid that the Conservatives would be massacred, because this is yet another U-turn on its way. When we saw the Prime Minister addressing the whole issue of corporation tax in the Commons yesterday, no sign, but clearly the markets are still incredibly spooked, not helped, of course, by that utterly incompetent Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, effectively saying to the markets, I'm only going to help out until Friday, and that's it, which means all the city slickers have been presumably making a fast buck in the city, knowing that the tap's going to be turned off. But although then, of course, we were told, Patrick, weren't we, by Bank of England sources, you know what that means, the PR people, that actually the aid will continue as long as it's needed. It's a shambles, to be honest. It's an economic shambles, and it's a real political mess. I cannot recall a worse start for a government of any political hue in my since I've been working as a journalist in Westminster, which is longer than you've been born.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it is a bit difficult at the minute, clearly, for more than a bit difficult, for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, but as you rightly pointed out, not really helped out by some people in the city, specifically Andrew Bailey, who behaved a little bit like he has a Labour Party membership.
I just apparently the only way you can sack a governor of the Bank of England is if you can prove they're insane, or if you can prove they've got their hand in the till. Well, I don't think anyone's challenging his financial integrity, but maybe we could challenge one or two other aspects of it, because I think the men in white coats should come for him, because that interview where he said the aid is being switched off on Friday was a disaster and sent the pound into free fall, dollars soaring again, and not helping everyone watching this. This affects all of us because it means government debt is more expensive, which is going to put all our interest rates up, and we're going to be in debt even longer. It's a complete car crash.
Yes, indeed. What would be more embarrassing for the Conservative Party now, if indeed they are facing, well, wipeout, really? Would it be more embarrassing for them to go into a general election knowing that they're going to lose, or would it be more embarrassing for them to change their leader and desperately hope that that does the trick? Because neither of those two things look particularly good.
Look, getting rid of another leader without a general election will look absolutely terrible, and people will think that the Tory party has taken leave of its senses. But then some people think the Tory party took leave of its senses when it voted Liz Truss in as leader in the first place. Look, she doesn't have the communication skills, in my views, to be able to fight her way out of this one very easily. She's wooden. She's pretty poor in interviews. She wasn't too bad in the Commons yesterday, but I would never have used the phrase "I don't understand," not once but twice, because that's the point. Nobody understands her economic plan. But her and the Chancellor own this, I'm afraid, Patrick. Interest rates were going to go up anyway, but because of the market's response to the botched mini-budget, every time people get a letter from the Building Society, the bank, saying your fixed rate's over, your rate's gone up £500 a month, they're going to blame the Tories.
Yeah, they are. But Keir Starmer, actually, for my money, isn't really doing anything to really warrant winning votes. He's using the same tactic that I used to use at high school discos, because I was rather rotund. So I'd just stand next to the fattest lad in the room so that I looked thin. Is he just standing opposite someone who looks totally unelectable, which makes him look like the Messiah?
I think that's exactly what he's doing. Look, we still don't know what how Labour would get us out of this mess. We know that they were going to accept the cancellation of the increase in national insurance, that they were going to accept the cut in basic rate of income tax next April. They weren't keen on corporation tax. But, I mean, the major parts of the Truss Kwasi Kwarteng package, they accepted. However, they're not in government, they're not in power, so they can just point the finger every time and say, it's your fault, it's your fault. And I have to say, when I was in the Commons yesterday, Patrick, the mood, mutinous was an understatement. It was hard to find even a loyalist being supportive, because they can see this is a real mess, and this is really, really damaging the Tories where they most need to be strong in terms of how they're perceived as economically competent. This isn't economic competence, is it? It's economically incontinent. And how many more U-turns are there going to be? The markets will like this one, but is she going to then have to give another one? Are they in the end going to have to cancel the entire budget? They should have anyway. All they should have done was the spending freeze on energy, and then in November, when they got things a bit more organised, then they could have done the tax cuts.
Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Pearce, consultant editor at the Daily Mail, giving you his hot take on what's been going on there. Poor Liz Truss. Do you think we should give her a chance, or actually do you think she's brought this on herself? I can't help but really think that it is bless her, a lack of communication skills that is holding her back with all of this, because she could be explaining things a bit better, explain what growth is, explain her plans a bit more, explain that Labour don't actually really oppose that much of what she's been saying. But alas, no, that doesn't seem to be the case. Well, we're moving on now to something, Well, a little bit different, I suppose. The High Court has heard that asylum seekers facing removal to Rwanda could have their claims processed in as little as 3 weeks from arrival. Well, let me do what with it, because none of the planes are taking off, but the government's plan to process asylum seekers in Rwanda is, you guessed it, still being challenged in the High Court for a second time today by campaign group Asylum Aid, which has called the procedure seriously unfair. Which I think is deeply unfair to the people of Rwanda. Actually, Charlotte Kilroy-Casey for Asylum Aid told the High Court that the process is highly abbreviated and lacks safeguards. Will the plan ever get off the ground? I've been slating Ryanair for a bit, so this time I'll give it to EasyJet. Or is it being run by EasyJet, which is why none of the planes have taken off? There we go. Balance. Should it even happen? I'm joined now by former Border Force and Security Advisor Henry Bolton and Steve Valdez-Simmons, who's Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director for Amnesty International. Steve, have you ever been to Rwanda?
I've not been to Rwanda. Many of my colleagues have. Indeed, I have colleagues who have been based in Rwanda. And, of course, Amnesty has reported on Rwanda for many, many years.
How's the current state of play in Rwanda, then? Because I've been speaking to quite a few people over there who are actually quite angry at the idea that Rwanda is being painted as some kind of hellhole.
Well, there are three things to think about the current state in Rwanda. One, Rwanda has a very large refugee population, comparable in size to our own, despite it being a much, much smaller and less resourced country, and a population that it is seriously struggling to meet the needs of. It doesn't need more people seeking asylum. It needs to deal with its own responsibilities. Secondly, it has a horrible human rights record, and it continues to be a state that refuses to have any truck with any disagreement with central state policy, and has been known to persecute people, including disappearances and torture, for any
well, I mean,
opposition.
to be fair, Steve, I suppose it begs the question then, does it have a worse human rights record than Albania? Because if it does, then why don't we just send them back to Albania? But Henry Bolton's on now, who is, of course, a former Border Force and Security Advisor. Henry, why don't we just send them back to Albania? It's a lot better than Rwanda by the sounds of things.
Because we haven't yet set up the mechanism for doing so, first of all, Patrick. But secondly, here in the UK, we're still processing their asylum claims. And there are various, really boring for viewers, I'm sorry, but various sort of technical-ish problems. So, for example, Albanians come from Kosovo, they come from northern Macedonia, and they come from Albania and southern Serbia as well. So they inhabit an area of the southern Balkans, not just the country of Albania itself. So they find it very easy to pull the wool over the eyes of the immigration officers who are interviewing them and so on when processing asylum claims. The fact is that our immigration officers and those officials dealing with these things have absolutely no knowledge of the ground. They have no knowledge of how to differentiate Albanians from Kosovo from those who come from Albania itself. The whole thing is an utter mess, particularly given the fact that Albania is a NATO member state. Kosovo is basically under the governance of the supervision of the European Union. In northern Macedonia is in accession talks, as is Albania, with the European Union. So we've got all sorts of issues there. Albania simply shouldn't be a country from which we are accepting asylum claims.
OK, Steve, do you think that basically everybody should just be allowed to stay here? Is your issue mainly with Rwanda or with staying here? Because my concern would be that if you've got a problem with a lot of people in this country wanting to send them to Rwanda, it implies we're a horrible little racist nation. Why would you want these people to stay here if it is such a nation?
What Amnesty wants is for our country, just as it expects others to do, is to deal with the asylum claims that come our way. That doesn't mean that everybody gets to stay. It means that people have their asylum claims determined here. And a major problem with government policy over the last 2 to 3 years now is that no, Henry is wrong. Claims are not being processed. Instead, we are building huge backlogs of people in limbo because our Home Office has determined not to process their claims. It's an appallingly foolish policy apart from anything else, and is one that is never going to be solved, even if, which should not happen, a few people are expelled to Rwanda.
OK,
I'm going to agree to an extent. This whole thing is ill-conceived, the whole methodology. It's ill-resourced. and the government's been throwing knee-jerk reactions and responses to the immigration problem, which includes the Rwanda idea. I mean, for me, yes, Rwanda is obviously attractive to the right wing and not particularly sort of thoughtful side of the Conservative Party. But the reality of it is that the logistics, the cost, and indeed the situation in Rwanda simply is not able, under any circumstances, to cope with the number of people that we would want potentially to send there. So it's an entirely flawed concept to start with. But
and I do think we've already, and I do think, from what I can gather, we've already given Rwanda about 120 million quid as well, which, let's be honest, we're not going to get back. So it is already a bit of an expensive issue. Steve, can I just ask you, are you at Amnesty also happy with our protocol for deciding when somebody is an asylum seeker? So you want the asylum process presumably to be sped up. So you're happy for people to presumably fail an asylum process if indeed it's deemed to be that they are not actual asylum seekers. But are you also unhappy with the categories that we would deem somebody to not be an asylum seeker? Do you want that changed as well?
It's not about changing categories. Seeking asylum is simply someone saying to our government, or whichever government they happen to be on the territory of, I'm entitled to asylum, I'm a refugee. That requires a proper determination of their claim. It may be decided, if done fairly, that they're not a refugee, in which case they may have no entitlement to stay. But unless and until you determine the person's claim, you're not in a position to do that.
Just to ask quickly, sorry, I've reported in the past on Amnesty or well, people claiming to be from Amnesty anyway, doing things like trying to block flights, but physically block flights, like, you know, getting on the runways and things like that. And then I've also spoken to those people and asked them, did they know who was on those flights? And they've said no. And they didn't know whether or not those people had their claims rejected for valid reasons. So you can understand my scepticism when it comes to you saying that you are, and Amnesty is, all right with the idea of really anyone being deported, Steve.
Well, let's be clear. Firstly, I don't think you can say that you have ever spoken to somebody who is protesting in the way that you have described and blocking a flight on behalf of Amnesty. Secondly, Amnesty certainly isn't okay with the expulsion of anybody from our country. What Amnesty accepts is that if people do make asylum claims, which is a legitimate thing to do, if their claims are properly and fairly determined and they are not refugees and they have no other claim to be here, it is appropriate to take steps to remove them.
OK, fair enough. I will throw over to you, Henry, give you the final word. Go on.
Sorry, I was going to say, I mean, you know, and I understand where Steve is coming from, but when we look at the United Nations Convention on Refugees and so on, you know, this is what, I suppose we're heading for 70 years old. It's been updated slightly, but it's simply not fit for purpose. It was designed for a situation in which refugees were refugees. What we've got at the moment is we've got economic migrants bypassing normal immigration controls simply by, as Steve says, saying, I want to claim asylum. I have a legitimate claim to asylum. And then we're at the moment, if we comply with the United Nations Convention on Refugees and with the ECHR rulings, then we're duty bound to process those claims. It's ridiculous. I know, I was advisor to the Albanian Prime Minister. I spent 7 years in that area of the Balkans tackling people smuggling. I know, plus I've dealt with refugees and I've dealt with wars on the ground. And I know that these people coming across on these boats, I just look at them, I know they're not refugees, most of them. And anybody with any clear mind on the situation in war zones and in refugee camps knows that. But what we're doing is we're simply, as Steve says, they say, but I want to claim asylum. Yeah. And therefore, we end up processing them. We should start pushing back on the UN Convention of Refugees and the ECHR and saying, no, this is ridiculous. All right. We need to reform the system.
That's fine. Yep, Steve, I just wanted to correct the record, actually, something I said earlier. As opposed to people actually being direct representatives of Amnesty International who blocked a flight from Stansted and were indeed given criminal charges as a result. Amnesty may well not have organised that. However, Amnesty International did say the charges were excessive and that they could discourage others from taking non-violent action in defence of human rights. Again, just to clarify, nobody knew who was on that. Some of those flights, and indeed in some cases it did turn out that some people were indeed violent criminals. But there we go. Thank you very much. Steve Alder-Simmons there, who is a refugee and migrant rights programme director at Amnesty International. And we've also had Henry Bolton there, a former Border Force and Security advisor. What do you make of that, ladies and gentlemen? GB Views at gbnews.uk. This is, of course, GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, police investigating the murder of 19-year-old Leah Croucher have found human remains at a property where some of her possessions were discovered. More on that after the break and the weather.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, the latest news headlines. The Chancellor is insisting his focus is on delivering the mini-budget. Amid reports the government's about to U-turn on the economic plans announced just under 2 weeks ago. It's after some Tory members of the 1922 committee urged the Prime Minister Liz Truss to reconsider Kwasi Kwarteng's fiscal plans. The Bank of England has intervened twice to stabilise the markets following the budget. However, that support comes to an end tomorrow. The High Court is hearing a second challenge against the government's plan to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. The government says the measures would reduce the numbers of migrants making the dangerous journey across the English Channel, but critics are concerned by Rwanda's human rights record. Asylum Aid, the charity mounting the legal challenge, says timescales led to unfairness and are impacting on people's ability to access justice. The number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen to a new record high. Figures released by NHS England show 7 million were waiting at the end of August. That's up from 6.8 million in July and is the highest number since records began in 2007. And Royal Mail workers are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. The Communication Workers Union says 115,000 members are joining picket lines outside Royal Mail offices. It's the first of 19 walkouts planned for the coming months. Royal Mail is saying industrial action will weaken their financial position, and the union is saying that the new plans don't make any sense. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Don't go anywhere. We're back in just a moment.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you, Polly. Now, police have appealed to the public for help after launching their murder investigation following the disappearance of 19-year-old Leah Croucher in 2019. Human remains were found at a house less than half a mile from where she was last seen around Milton Keynes, and forensics experts are now scouring the property. Thames Valley Police have acknowledged that the house was not searched in their initial investigation back in 2019. We can cross now to Milton Keynes live and speak to GB News reporter Jack Carson, who is outside the property. Jack, thank you very much. What's the latest, please?
So the latest we've heard an hour ago from the Thames Valley Police, who said in a statement that a Home Office post-mortem examination is expected to take place on Friday, so that's tomorrow, although this may take some time, as will the formal identification of the deceased person located inside the property. Of course, police were tipped off by a member of the public about this property on Monday. They've been here since then, where they discovered the rucksack and other personal possessions of Leah Croucher here, and also, as well as you mentioned, human remains. She was 19 when she went missing on the 15th of February in 2019 here in Milton Keynes, and that sparked a 3.5-year-long search with police, reviewing 1,200 hours of CCTV footage, going door to door with over 4,000 home inquiries as well. But it was only on Monday when they were alerted to this property here. Now Leah Croucher was walking to work at 8:15 a.m. on the 15th of February when she vanished on Buzzacott Lane. In that location and this location is only about half a mile away. So residents and neighbours here are shocked at the distance and how close that her final place that she was seen, and actually where her possessions have been found here, how close that is. I'm not sure if you can see behind me, but people and neighbours have been coming today to lay floral tributes here and pay their respects. One of them saying that, Leah, you were never forgotten and we never gave up. Another saying, time for your parents to take you home. Now, it's worth noting that statement that no human remains have officially formally been identified to anybody just yet. Ian Stewart, the MP for Milton Keynes South, has also said that it was extremely upsetting to learn of the developments in the search for Leah, and he added, I'm in contact with Thames Valley Police about the situation and will help them in any way I can. My thoughts and prayers continue to be with Leah's loved ones about this difficult time. Leah's family continue to be kept informed and updated by the police.
Jack, thank you very much. Jack Carson there, who is outside that property in Milton Keynes where human remains have sadly been found. Right, we're moving on from that now. We're going to go into the world of my inbox, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Great to have so many of you emailing in, actually. Lots of you getting in touch. And shock horror, one of the big ones that we've had you on is NHS waiting times. A record now, 7 million people. For the first time ever, 7 million people are waiting now for NHS treatment, which is absolutely shocking, to be honest with you, isn't it? Adam says, I am an NHS surgeon and recognise on a daily basis that the NHS is in trouble, though I think efficiency rather than more funding is the answer. There we go. Privatisation may happen in the future. Who knows? However, if you're unhappy with consultant salaries now, privatisation will increase those salaries massively. I'm not unhappy. with consultant salaries. I was unhappy with the British Medical Association's representative for consultants coming onto my show yesterday, not being able to tell me how much consultants were being paid, not being able to tell me what he wanted them to be paid, but demanding that they were paid more. I think if I was a consultant, I'd be having a word with my union, not about me going on strike, but about whether or not that chap is my best representative. Anyway, there we go. Dave says, my wife is an administrator in the NHS and comes home screaming every day at the waste and inefficiency she witnesses. The NHS is run for the benefit of the staff, not the patients. But the problem is, it's not always run for the benefit of the patients, is it? You just look at the amount of negligence claims that the NHS has to fork out every single year. But of course, it's not the NHS's fault, no. It's because staff are so overworked, they're so tired, they're so stressed all the time that they can't think straight. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is down to money. Mel says, after COVID, of course there's going to be a backlog with so many nurses, theatre techs, doctors leaving too. And if people looked after their health and weight better to begin with, the list would be shorter. So we've got a potent combination now, haven't we, of, and I'll say this as, let's be honest with you, a bit of a fat lad, there are too many fat people in adverts. Whenever you walk around the street now, fat has become incredibly beautiful. Fat is fashionable these days, you know, and so basically we're promoting people to be unhealthy. And then we have this huge backlog with the NHS, largely caused by coronavirus, and then we've got people... By the way, I've never been able to get to the bottom of this. I've asked this for several days in a row to a whole host of NHS professionals that I've had here on GB News Live, where I've said to them, OK, well, if they're leaving the NHS, what other country's health system are they going to go and work in? Well, they're not. They're just leaving the NHS and getting different jobs. But a lot of those people leaving our NHS came from other countries to work in the NHS and then decided to leave that. So actually the problem, realistically, is just healthcare, isn't it, around the world, not just us here. But up next, the government says it's down to Buckingham Palace to decide whether the controversial, I won't try and pronounce it, diamond should be used in the coronation of Camilla, the Queen Consort. Essentially, what they're saying is if Camilla puts that crown on her head, the Indian government might be very, very unhappy. Talks of reparation, should we give it back? Well, potentially, they can try and come and get it, can't they? We'll be back in a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
OK, well, the government says it's now down to Buckingham Palace to decide whether the controversial Koh-i-Noor diamond should be used in the coronation of Camilla, the Queen Consort. Who would have thought this would be the most controversial thing about Camilla becoming Queen? Anyway, the gem was the star feature of the Queen Mother's coronation crown she wore in 1937. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's governing party is said to be concerned that the diamond, which was given to Queen Victoria by the East India Company in the 19th century, would revive unwelcome memories of the British Empire. For who? No one would have known about it unless they just brought it up. Anyway, options now could include removing the diamond, or Camilla could opt not to wear the crown altogether. Bonkers stuff. I'm joined now by royal broadcaster and historian Rafe Hadel-Manku. Rafe, why is this even a thing? Who cares whether or not we upset Modi? I mean, he's not been around anywhere near as long as that crown.
Well, yes, I mean, ultimately, this is mischief-making by Modi. India's government, it's a Hindu nationalist government, increasingly obsessed about identity issues and the state and promoting patriotism in the country. And, of course, currently going through very delicate trade negotiations with the British government. And, of course, this follows on from Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, making incendiary comments, at least that's how they were received in India, about the tendency of Indian migrants to this country coming here as students on visas and not going back as soon as they should. And so it can't be any coincidence that it's only a day or two after India protested Suella Braverman's comments about Indian migrants that we're getting this story about the infamous Kohinoor diamond.
I mean, realistically, wouldn't it be absolutely staggering for the coronation of a monarch of this country and the Queen Consort to have anything dictated to it, really, by another nation?
Well, of course, I mean, the Kohinoor diamond is an extremely important symbol in India, but the problem with it is that it doesn't really, there's no country in the world that can actually make a claim of ironclad ownership over it. It's had a very long and bloody history, and it's been owned by a succession of empires. So it's gone from the Mughal Empire to the Persian Empire of Iran, to the Durrani Empire of Afghanistan, then to the Sikh Empire, and finally to the British Empire. So it's very convoluted. Its last owner was the Maharaja Dalip Singh of the Punjab, who's actually Sikh, not part of the Hindu state. India didn't exist at the time that the diamond was actually taken by the British from Dalip Singh, who was only a boy at the time. It was signed over by a treaty, but it was, quite controversially it was done. But, that part of it, India, or the Sikh state, is actually in modern-day Pakistan. So Pakistan lays claim to it. The Afghanis and the Taliban have laid claim to it from the time when they owned it. You now have the Indians laying claim to it. Iran has a claim to it. So I think it's best off left where it actually is, in the crown of the Queen Consort, where it's being honoured quite rightly. Every consort since Queen Alexandra, Edward VII's wife, has been crowned with their own unique crown bearing the Kohinoor diamond. For obvious cost reasons today, a new crown for Queen Camilla isn't being made, but I think it's only quite right that the king gets his wish, that his queen should wear the crown of his beloved grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, into which the Kohinoor diamond is set. And it's a way to basically allow the world to see this most beautiful of objects.
Rafe, I think that was absolutely perfectly put. I mean, the sheer volume of people who could lay claim to what is no doubt a beautiful diamond is bonkers. I mean, why on earth would we want to... I mean, at some point there, realistically, if we took this to its natural conclusion, we might be not wearing it just in case we offended the Taliban, which I think really proves the point that, that Camilla should just wear this thing. On a slightly different note, Rafe, just before I let you get going, is there also going to be any possibility of a stripped-back coronation? We had a chat about this yesterday. I'm hoping not. I said it before, I'll say it again. I want proper coronation, not Coronation Street.
Well, speaking of Maharajas, I used to be a good friend of the Maharaja of Drangadra, a wonderful old man who was actually at the coronation in 1953. And he was a Hindu, great scholar living in India. It wasn't British, wasn't an Anglican. And he wrote to me many years ago, about 15 years ago, and he said any attempt to tamper with the coronation service would be an act of vandalism against an item of world heritage, like dismantling the Taj Mahal or Stonehenge. And I think that puts it wonderfully. No country in the world has such an ancient service and ceremony as we do in this 1,000-year-old coronation ceremony. It's as important a contribution to world civilization as the works of Shakespeare or the paintings of Constable or Turner, and I think it should be left as it is. We protect our buildings with Grade 1 listed heritage status. I think it's time we started protecting our cultural assets with Grade 1 listed status. and I would certainly put the coronation ceremony at the top of that list.
I agree completely, Rafe. Thank you very much. Rafe Haydel-Mankou, who is the royal broadcaster and historian and a legend as well. There we go. Right, in a few moments, I will be asking how much trouble our Prime Minister Liz Truss really is in and whether it's now the time to force a general election. Lots of you have been getting in touch, with your thoughts. Janice says, it doesn't matter which Tory is PM. The Remainers in Westminster won't stop backstabbing until Brexit is overturned. No respect for democracy at all. I am now just deeply, deeply concerned that we have essentially just become ungovernable as a country. I mean, even things like we've just spoken about there. Oh, should our new Queen Consort not wear this crown just in case it offends the Indians? Well, the diamond isn't even Indian. In fact, it might belong to the Taliban. And we're going to do it because we don't want to offend the Taliban. All of this ridiculous infighting, every single issue has got to say, well, we can't do this because we might offend people who were born men but are now women. Everything is absolutely bonkers. And, you know, now we've got all this backstabbing as well. I can't help but feel as though we are just becoming ungovernable. Anyway, Richard says, it seems to me that there are multiple backseat drivers in the Conservative Party. Too right, actually. A lot of people who, dare I say it, didn't want to inherit the mess that we've got now in this country and maybe didn't have the bottle to do it. And so they thought, oh, we'll give Liz a go. Anyway, with that in mind, I'm finding it difficult to support them despite having been a lifelong Tory voter. This is one emailer. I can't have Starmer at any price, gosh, because he has a, quote, coat of many colours and cannot be trusted. Interesting that, actually, yes, he was a QC, now I suppose he's a KC, I believe, isn't he? And wants to abolish the monarchy at one point. He, kind of fluffed his lines over the old Labour Brexit thing. He was a rampant socialist under Corbyn. Now he's not, I think. Anyway, there we go. Chris says, I am, fortunately, at the time of my life where I care little who is in power. You know what, Chris? Good for you, actually, I must say. Good for you. I wish I cared less about things. Anyway, perhaps Starmer should be given a chance. The Liberal Democrats would not succeed either with their current non-leader. I mean, non-leader is probably the best way of putting whatever the living heck Ed Davey is. Right, mutinous Tory MPs are now, though, apparently openly talking about replacing Liz Truss, with the party trailing Labour by a record margin in the polls. Just a quick point on the polls, right? Do you not think that maybe it's because people have just stopped caring? A lot of people went out and voted for the Conservatives at the last general election. Did they really? Or did they really vote for Boris? Did they vote to get Brexit done? Did they vote because they were sick and tired of what they were seeing taking place immigration-wise? And they thought maybe Boris is the only person that we can really get to actually sort that out. And so now that people have thought, well, Boris is gone, I've got a choice between Truss and Starmer, everything's been a bit saturated for a while, I've been locked down left, right and centre, I'm absolutely skinned. When you look at these polls, I can't help but wonder whether or not it's less of a downturn for the Tories and more of an upturn in people who will not be bothered to vote at the next general election. However, backbenchers are discussing amongst themselves how and when to move against the Prime Minister, reportedly, who is, it's worth remembering, just 6 weeks into the job. But is it actually time for the government to seek a new mandate from the electorate? Is it time for a general election? I'm joined now by Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List, who I assume wants a general election, otherwise he'd be mad, and Charlie Rowley, the former special advisor to Michael Gove. Charlie, I'll start with you, just because I'm not as certain about what answer you're about to give me. Do you want a general election?
No, Patrick, and thank you very much for having me on this afternoon. It's absolutely not the right time to have a general election. We had one in 2019 where, as you say, thousands, millions of people voted for the Conservative Party who had never done so before. And that gave the Conservative Party the mandate to go on and govern the country. We live in a parliamentary democracy, so you don't vote for the individual, however popular Boris was, and however much and however responsible he was for winning us that election. It is a parliamentary democracy whereby the Conservative Party has got the mandate to govern for the length of time, 4 or 5 years, however long it can within that framework. And Liz Truss should be given the opportunity to take up her post, as she has done, and govern for the next couple of years.
Yeah, Peter, I'll bring you in now. Peter was former editor of Labour List. Would it not be classic Labour? There's always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And then when they do potentially win, if there's a general election that took place tomorrow, hypothetically, they'd be inheriting one of the biggest messes that this country has seen since their Blitz.
Well, Labour's got to put the country first, so that means having a general election soon, but not immediately. When we've had a run on the pound, clearly we don't want a general election to be called tomorrow. We've got to think about household finances and people's lives, first of all. But more broadly, if, I say rather than when, but if the government can exert some measure of control over the economy and what's happening in the pound, then of course, if you're the opposition, you want a general election as soon as possible so you can deliver real change for the country and all the things that Keir Starmer's been asking for, like the windfall tax. And it is a sign that as we get one or two government cave-ins that these things might be happening. But really, you want to be out there on the doorstep campaigning for a Labour government.
So you're absolutely certain that you're not calling for a general election right now, and that's not just because you think the country's in a mess and you don't want Labour to have any hand in that, Peter?
Right, I think that's looking at it in a very tactical way. You've got to put the country first, which is there's been a run on the pound within the last fortnight that was self-inflicted by the government. So, of course, Labour want to be in government in the next 12 months, but would a general election tomorrow shore up the markets or cause turmoil and cause people to worry about their pensions even more?
Charlie, I think I'll bring you back in now. Charlie Rowley, the former special advisor to Michael Gove. I've just had it in my ear. Apparently a poll has just dropped, conveniently, to say that 60% of people do want a general election. I know that you say that we do live in a parliamentary democracy, and we do, of course, and that's great. But Boris was such a big personality that actually a lot of people voted for him, and now he's not there. They didn't vote for this, did they?
Oh, well, I think just to pick up on a point that Peter said, if Labour were elected, if there were a general election tomorrow, yes, there'd be even more economic turmoil. That would be exactly the Conservative Party manifesto and what it would take to the country. But look, you're absolutely right. Boris was a huge figure in 2019. The campaign was about getting Brexit done. And but it was slightly more than that. It was about making sure that areas all over the country that never voted Conservative before, the reason why that they did in 2019 was because for too long they felt as though they were communities that had been overlooked and undervalued and left behind by Labour. And so the idea of going back to the polls so soon I think would be not the right thing for the country. The Conservatives will continue to deliver and look after those communities and everyone right across the country.
OK, as it currently stands, Peter, to be fair, Keir Starmer's biggest selling point is that he's not Liz Truss, because we don't fully know. What do we know about him? Great British energy. We don't even know exactly what that is. Does that mean that Ed Miliband's in charge of whether or not my lights come on? I mean, what are we voting for if it's Labour?
Well, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves called for a windfall tax. After a couple of government U-turns, it looks like we're getting one.
So we're getting so vote Labour, get a windfall tax. Is that where we are? Is that it?
No, there's tons more policies. I'm sure you at Labour conference, there was a lot more about...
Oh, yes. There were a few. Yes, OK, all right, fair enough. So do you think, though, that Keir Starmer and that front bench, Peter, and before I give the final word over quickly to Charlie, they would do a decent, competent job of actually running the country at the minute? Because it is tough times at the moment.
Yeah, it is, but I don't accept, even for a moment, the idea of a run on the pound when under Labour and it's just under the Tories. I think the shadow cabinet is really strong now. Keir Starmer's reshuffled it once or twice. And also, just cast your mind back to the last Labour government, when there was a global economic crisis. Gordon Brown did not have a meltdown. He brought international leaders together for the G20 in London and helped shore up the global economy. So that gives me confidence that Labour will put the national interest first and the markets will respond in a sensible way.
Interesting. Final word to you, Charlie. Look, we're hearing backroom noises, of course, of apparent discontent and stuff like this, and even this idea some Tories might want Labour to have a go so that they kind of maybe mess it up under difficult circumstances and the Tories can come back in. Do you think, realistically, there is any chance that the Tories might biff Truss 6 weeks into a job?
Well, again, I would just politely remind people that it was the 2008 crash that was caused under a Labour government. So people shouldn't be looking so soon to get rid of the Tories and get in Labour because of the economic mess that they left behind previously. But I do think we need to wait a bit longer. Obviously, it's not been the best success of a new government. I think everybody can be open about that from what we've seen. But there is a new fiscal event coming forward. Kwasi Kwarteng and the Prime Minister will announce their new economic package on the 31st of October, if not before, which will seek to shore up the markets. And and go for growth, which will be delivered and distributed right across the country.
Well, it'd be nice if she was allowed to, because every time she opens her mouth and announces something, all of a sudden someone else gets involved and we're talking about U-turns and nothing actually happens. But there we go. Peter, thank you very much. Peter Edwards, the former editor of Labour Listen, Charlie Rowley as well, the former special advisor to Michael Gove. Both of you enjoyed that very much. Great stuff. Right, OK, I was going to read some emails, but apparently I've run out of time. So you are with me, Patrick Christys, here on GB News Live, on your TV, radio and online. Coming up, yes, I'll be continuing this trust discussion. Do you actually want a general election? Do you think people need to shut up and leave her alone for a little bit? Do you think people need to actually give her the opportunity to do what she's saying she's going to do? Or do you think she screwed it up and you'd like to see Keir Starmer in charge? The Rwanda plan, talking of screwing things up, goodness gracious me, will we ever see a plane take off for Rwanda? We'll be discussing all of that because it's back in the High Court. And single-sex prisons. Do you think, let me just simplify that, do you think men should be in women's prisons? No, me neither. Don't go anywhere. Before that, it's your weather.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Many places having a fine day today. There will be sunny spells over the next few days, but there's also going to be bands of showers whizzing through on a fairly brisk breeze, particularly across northern areas. A couple of weather fronts moving in tonight. These ones close to the south as well, but say most places have been between these weather systems today. So it's a fine evening for many. But the cloud and rain is pushing in across the central belt of Scotland, and then another line of rain coming into the Highlands and across Northern Ireland through the night. A few showers likely across Wales and southwest England, but much of England and Wales is having a dry night. Not as chilly as last night. We'll easily drop down into single figures in some towns and cities, but many places staying well above freezing. Certainly, as I said, a lot milder than last night. As we go into Friday, it's a bit of a mess, really. Lots of cloud in the south with outbreaks of rain working their way from west to east. At the same time, a line of rain spreading from southern Scotland into northern England. Behind that, plenty of heavy showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but some brighter spells. Much of northeast England, North Wales having a dry and a fine day again. Temperatures in the south close to average. A fresher feel, though, across Scotland and Northern Ireland with a brisk wind. Much of that rain tends to shimmy out of the way during Friday night and into Saturday. So quite a few of us, certainly in the east, will start the weekend dry. But here comes another line of rain, quite heavy rain as well. But it does move through pretty rapidly during Saturday morning. But a wet spell for northern England and Scotland, some blustery winds again across the northwest. And then we're left with sunshine and showers for many during Saturday afternoon. Again, those showers tending to zip through on a fairly brisk wind, and temperatures close to average across the south, a bit fresh further north. So low pressure dominating, bands of showers zipping through during the weekend with some brighter spells in between. This low could bring some more persistent rain on Sunday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, everybody. It is now 5 o'clock, and this is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, well, I'm not going anywhere. That's what Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng said after his boss, the Prime Minister Liz Truss, and her government come under intense pressure to make a U-turn on key aspects of last month's mini-budget. The defiant Chancellor said he was focused on delivering the economic plan, but will he be given the time? Also, the High Court has heard that asylum seekers facing removal to Rwanda could have their claims processed in as little as 3 weeks from arrival. So will this plan now finally go ahead? Home Secretary Suella Braverman certainly hopes so. Also, check this out, something that has got you absolutely fizzing in the inbox so far today. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Record waiting list for the NHS. 7 million people now waiting for routine NHS care. Pretty much everyone in the NHS wants a pay rise. Yet again, that figure, 7 million people wanting basic care. Good grief. It is the not healthy service. That's what NHS should stand for. Get in touch with those views. Don't be shy. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Before that, there was your latest headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. The latest news headlines from the GB newsroom. The Chancellor is insisting his focus is on delivering the mini-budget. Amid reports, the government's about to U-turn on the new measures. That's after some Tory members of the 1922 committee urged Prime Minister Liz Truss to reconsider Kwasi Kwarteng's economic plans. The Bank of England has had to intervene twice to stabilise the markets following the budget. However, that support comes to an end tomorrow. International Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch says it's important her party works together.
Talking about changing leaders at this time would be disastrous. We should not be talking about that at all. We should be focusing on what is important for people's lives, for their jobs and for their prosperity. It's time to unite and get behind the Prime Minister and focus on her growth agenda.
The High Court is hearing a second challenge against the government's plan to deport from the UK illegal migrants to Rwanda. The government says the measures would reduce the numbers of illegal migrants crossing the English Channel, but critics are concerned by Rwanda's human rights record. Asylum Aid, the charity mounting the legal challenge, is saying tight timescales are leading to unfairness and are impacting on people's ability to access justice. A court's been hearing how a nurse accused of murdering several babies loved her job and cared deeply about the babies and their families. Lucy Letby's defence has told Manchester Crown Court the neonatal unit where Miss Letby worked was overstretched and understaffed. Letby is charged with murdering 7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital during 2015 and 2016. She allegedly wrote notes to herself which read, "I am evil" and "I killed them on purpose," which were found during a search of her home. The 32-year-old, however, denies all allegations. Around £4.5 billion awarded as part of furlough payments during the pandemic was lost through mistakes and fraudulent claims, a public spending watchdog has said. The National Audit Office is criticising the government for not doing enough to check process when it rolled out the scheme, which overall cost £97 billion. However, it does say the scheme met its primary objective to protect British workers and businesses during an extraordinary national health emergency. The government says it's still working to root out those who abuse the system, with HMRC expecting to recover £1.1 billion over the next 2 years. The head of NATO says the circumstances for his organisation to use nuclear weapons were extremely remote, but that there would be severe consequences if Russia were to use them. Jens Stoltenberg refused to be drawn on the details of how the alliance would respond, but that using them against Ukraine would be crossing a red line. He said NATO would remain vigilant in the coming weeks as Russia holds its own nuclear drills.
We have increased our vigilance in the Baltic and North Seas and doubled our naval presence there. Allies are increasing security around key installations. And we are stepping up our intelligence sharing and surveillance across all domains, from space to undersea capabilities.
A jury in the US is recommending life in prison for a gunman who killed 17 people in a school shooting in Florida in 2018. Nicholas Cruz, who was 19 at the time, used a semi-automatic weapon at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. He pleaded guilty to the murder of 14 of his fellow students and 3 members of staff. Royal Mail workers are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. The Communication Workers Union says 115,000 members are joining picket lines outside Royal Mail offices. It's one of a series of 19 walkouts planned in protest against various proposals by the company. The Royal Mail says the union's action is weakening their financial position. And the Prince and Princess of Wales are visiting the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London today to see how a sports charity is helping to inspire lives. Coach Corps, launched by William and Kate in 2012, aims to create the next generation of sports coaches. It's helped more than 650 disadvantaged young people get a coaching apprenticeship. In celebration of the charity's 10th anniversary, the royal couple are due to meet some of the youngsters and have a taster of the sports on offer themselves. That's it. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Patrick Christys is back now.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, bit of political turmoil. We've got Rwanda flights that may or may not be taking off, and absolutely nobody in this country, pretty much, can get medical care on the NHS. So that's what we're going to be rattling through this hour. But we start with the political and money issues that are facing this country, because within the last few hours, Kwasi Kwarteng has insisted the government's position has not changed as he faced pressure to abandon more elements of the mini-budget, which caused a bit of market turmoil. At an event in Washington, D.C., where he is, the Chancellor said that he was totally focused on delivering the tax-cutting plans, which are aimed at increasing UK economic growth. But earlier this afternoon, reports suggested talks are underway between Number 10 and the Treasury on abandoning other elements of the 43 billion quid tax-cutting plan. Some might call that another U-turn, including the commitment to axe a planned increase in corporation tax. Joining me now to make sense of all of this utter economic jargon is Ian Beck, Research Fellow at the European Institute, London School of Economics. Right, thank you very much. How are the markets?
How are the markets?
Yes, indeed, because... Say that again?
The markets are very erratic. Yeah. If you look at the last few minutes, you see the pound has risen against the other currencies. My experience is that you don't spend too much time trying to worry about what the markets say from minute to minute. Instead, you look at what's driving their erratic and volatile behaviour, and then you begin to understand why what the Truss government is doing really is outside the norms that we expect of.
Well, can I ask this? Can I ask this point? Because I am somewhat of an economic layman, which I think is pretty obvious, but is the market reaction to this largely down to the fact that it's quite unusual behaviour from Truss and Kwarteng? It's against the status quo, as opposed to actually being that wild?
Well, it's unusual in the sense that they're trying to do something which is an impossibility, which is to have tax cuts, more or at least the same public spending, but not increase the public debt. You can have 2 out of 3 of these, but you cannot have all 3. It's what many academics call a trilemma rather than a dilemma. And to try to pretend otherwise is fantasy economics.
But their Go for Growth agenda seems to have been reinforced somewhat by the IMF, which say that we could grow as an economy quicker, or to a greater extent than other G7 nations. And when you look at some of the European economies, for example, at this moment in time, it does appear that maybe we're doing a bit better. Could we not have had more ambition?
Well, ambition is one thing, but economic realities are another, and you cannot make 3 things into 2 work in the way that they want to. Now, yes, there are some European economies that are in a worse state than us, and we have a propensity to take comfort in that and say, oh, look at the Germans, look at the Japanese, look at the Italians.
Yes.
The Japanese are European, and say, right, they're facing bigger problems. But that's not a way of trying to run your own country. You want to be able to do things that make sense in your own terms, rather than worrying about whether you're half an inch better than somebody else.
Oh, yes, well, indeed, although sometimes that does help. But when it comes to Keir Starmer, I mean, would it actually be particularly better if Sir Keir Starmer was the man in charge? Because from what I can gather, he's made a lot of noise, but when you really break it down, his party doesn't actually disagree hugely with Liz Truss's core economic setup or ideas, really. It just sounds like it does. But when you really break it down, there isn't a world of difference between the two.
No, there's not going to be an enormous difference because the problems or challenges confronting the British economy don't go away because a different party comes into power. The one big difference is that the way the Truss and Kwarteng duo have conducted themselves since the so-called mini-budget, which in fact is the most maxi of budgets, is that they have lost the credibility of first the markets and second the population and third the media. When you lose credibility, it's very hard to get it back. And that's why I think there is so much skepticism about the approach they're taking, rather than whether you need something to deal with all the problems simultaneously, because they are mounting up.
Ian, thank you very, very much. Ian Baghdad, Research Fellow, European Institute, London School of Economics. Dumbing things down a bit for me now, which actually was much needed. Now, back more into my field of expertise. Some polling experts are suggesting that Liz Truss is now as unpopular as Tory former Prime Minister John Major was after Black Wednesday, when Britain crashed out of the European exchange rate mechanism. So, is her job at risk? I'm pleased to be joined by Chris Curtis, Head of Political Polling at Opinium. Now, Chris, thank you very, very much. Just paint a picture for me of exactly where she is at the polls. So everyone keeps banging on about, oh, Liz Truss is doing terribly in the polls. What are the numbers?
I mean, Liz Truss is doing terribly in the polls is not a bad summary of where the polls currently are. Ultimately, most of the time in British politics, the dynamic is pretty simple. You've got a Labour Party who are seen as nice, good for public services, and you've got a Conservative Party who are seen as competent, good at running the economy. Most of the time, elections are a fight between those two things, and usually the Conservatives win. That's British politics in a nutshell. When things go really wrong for the Conservatives, it's when they're no longer seen as the competent party that's good on the economy. We saw that happen in the middle of the 90s after Black Wednesday. It led to that landslide Labour victory in 1997. We don't know how long this is going to be, but I think it's fair to say that we're also seeing that for the Conservative Party now. We're seeing pretty substantial leads for the Labour Party on the question of competence and economic competence, and mostly driven by that, the number of people who say that they'd vote Conservative in the general election has declined quite substantially.
OK, now, I hope, by the way, you don't live in one of those North London townhouses that Liz Truss appears to hate, apparently. It did say you're in North London there, but there we go. When it comes to the numbers of first-time voters at last general election, do you have... I'm not necessarily sure if you do or not, but do you have any figures on that? Because my theory is that there are a lot of people who might have voted in the last general election for Boris Johnson, especially up north, who might not normally have voted. And so when we're seeing people now saying that, you know, the Tories are taking a battering in the polls, I'm just wondering whether the turnout's going to be shockingly bad at the next general election, as opposed to, you know, this massive coronation of Keir Starmer.
I think it's fair to say that there are a lot of Conservative voters now, not insignificant number of Conservative voters who have switched straight over to the Labour Party, and that's one of the reasons why Labour are ahead in the polls. But there's an even larger number of people who voted Conservative at the last election that now say that they don't know who they'd vote for in such a sort of volatile political climate, still yet to be convinced by the Labour Party. Now, if you sort of want the optimistic vision for Liz Truss, you know, there may be a chance that those voters who are still not convinced by the Labour Party might float back to the Conservatives before the next election, particularly, I suppose, if Liz Truss does manage to bring in a substantial amount of economic growth that she can take credit for. Cynical about whether she'll end up achieving that, given everything else that's going on, but it's certainly a possibility. If she doesn't, and if the Labour Party don't end up winning those voters either, obviously there's a realistic chance that many of them don't end up going out to vote, and we do end up with a lower turnout election.
Do you think we'd still be in this situation in the polls if Boris Johnson was in charge?
Well, look, I mean, the numbers we saw for Boris Johnson in his final days in office were also not particularly good either. I think at the time when Boris Johnson was boosted out by the Conservative Party, as a pollster, I was also pretty convinced that it was unlikely he'd go on to win a majority at the next general election. But ultimately, we are now in a much worse position. The Conservative Party is in a much worse position in the polls than they were when Boris Johnson was in charge. That is mostly driven by the economic decisions that Liz Truss made, particularly the economic decisions that were different from what Boris Johnson was making. So ultimately, I think it's fair to say that the Conservative Party would probably be in a better situation now if Boris Johnson was still in charge.
Chris Curtis, thank you very much. Head of polling at Opinion, and lovely kitchen as well, might I just say. Chris Curtis there. Right, OK, what do you make of that, people? It's all a little bit tricky at the moment, isn't it? Because I think every single person has to hold their hands up and say things have not been... They just haven't been great for Truss, have they, really? Quad saying, I tweeted, oh, it looks like we finally got a Conservative government now. Well, they did U-turn on a couple of things, and that tweet aged about as well as clotty cream on a hot day. But... And then you look over at the Labour Party and you think, well, can Keir Starmer actually really run a bath? Are we that clear about what he stands on, various different things? What is his proper manifesto? When you really dig deep into it, he doesn't massively seem to disagree too much with what's been going on economically in the Conservative Party at the moment. So it is a bit of a tricky time, a bit of a grey area politically for us. Do you want a general election? Would that sort it out? Would you be bored of that? The Tories surely can't have another leader again. They can't biff Truss just 6 weeks into her leadership. So we are a little bit stranded. But meanwhile, and this is what I'm concerned about, one of the things I'm concerned about, meanwhile, people keep coming across the channel. Meanwhile, issues stop being resolved. The High Court has heard that asylum seekers facing removal to Rwanda could have their claims now processed in as little as 3 weeks from arrival. But surely that's wishful thinking, because that's not been happening. People have been waiting a year, years, in fact, for their asylum process to go through. The government's plan to process asylum seekers in Rwanda is being challenged in the High Court for not once, but for the second time today by campaign group Asylum Aid, which has called the procedure, quote, seriously unfair. Right, our reporter Catherine Forster has been following the case for us.
I'm here at the High Court in central London for the first day in a 2-day hearing of another legal challenge to the government's plan to send some of the people who cross the English Channel illegally on small boats on a one-way ticket to Rwanda in Africa, which is some 4,000 miles away. Now, the charity that is bringing the case, Asylum Aid, says that the government's plans are inherently unlawful and unfair, and for 3 specific reasons. Firstly, they say Rwanda is not a safe country. Secondly, say the time frame is simply too short, a proposed 2 to 3 weeks from people arriving to potentially being deported. Also, they say that people are not being provided with sufficient information. Now, of course, the government has yet to send a single person to Rwanda, because when the former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, announced this scheme in April, there were immediate legal challenges. And the government did win those, but then it was escalated to the European Court of Human Rights, and it was blocked at that level. Now, the current Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is still very keen to get this plan up and running. She said last week that it is her dream and indeed obsession to see a flight take off full of people who have crossed the channel illegally. But it is no means certain when that is going to happen. And at the moment, the numbers still go up. This year alone, and we're only mid-October, remember, we've now had nearly 36,000 people arrive in the country this way. That's up from 28,500 last year. So this is a problem that as yet the government have tried and failed to get a grip of, and it will be interesting to see what happens now, and indeed if anybody is ever sent to Rwanda.
OK, right, thank you very much, Catherine. Well, that's the latest, really, from outside the court there, as we're awaiting a verdict when it comes to whether or not, essentially, flights can take off and go to Rwanda. But joining me in the studio right now is Ivan Sampson, a specialist immigration lawyer. Ivan, thank you very much. We were having a little chat there. Not that we weren't listening to Catherine, of course, having a little chat there. So there's lots to get stuck into here. First things first, how likely do you think it is that the High Court is going to essentially rule that flights can take off to Rwanda?
Well, there's 2 challenges. The one that you heard about today, and that's to do with the process itself, whether the process is fair, whether this accelerated decision-making is legal. The other challenge is to do whether the policy is unfair itself, because Rwanda is a country which we say is not safe for the asylum seekers to return to, because they torture their own citizens, they torture political opponents. And is it right that we send refugees to a country what we say doesn't have human rights in their own country?
OK, so it's a question of, process and actual policy as well. So both of those things. Why would it be impossible to process somebody's asylum claim within 3 weeks, do you think? Because some people might argue it should be pretty obvious if you're an asylum seeker.
Well, it's not 3 weeks. First of all, if you're in detention, you have 7 days in which to prepare a case and present it to the Home Office. The Home Office then will decide the case within 7 days, and then they'll give 5 working days' notice to remove you. Now, if you look at the government's website on asylum, the very first paragraph, what it says is that we'll attempt to decide your case within 6 months, but where your case is complex, where you've got additional evidence that you need to get, it could take longer.
Right.
Now, it begs the question, why are the government doing this? And in my view, it's politically motivated. They're trying to send a message out that we're going to...
But the thing is that it probably, even the argument about it being politically motivated, it was in Conservative manifestos to sort out immigration. And at the last general election, loads of people, by an 80-odd seat majority, voted for the Conservative Party. And so, yes, it is probably politically motivated, but that's what the people want.
Yes, but this is to do with I think this is focused at those coming across the channel. I mean, look, we've got 500,000 to 1 million illegal migrants in the UK already, unaccounted for.
Yeah.
It takes a year to process asylum applications at the moment. So the focus should be on that group of people and not the 26,000 or 30,000 coming across the channel.
I suppose the problem is there's just so many of them. People are deeply, deeply concerned now. There's so many of them. Towns, and this brings us on to our next point, actually, towns and cities right across the UK where hotels after hotels after hotels or B&Bs or whatever are now being used by the Home Office to house these people. Local residents, I'm sure the vast majority of them, very welcoming and understanding, are naturally concerned about elements of this. But there's a story that we clocked earlier on today, which I haven't seen given too much coverage, actually, which I want to talk to you about now, which is some children have been going missing from these migrant hotels, haven't they?
Yes, I mean, the story broke in the Daily Mail, and I thought it took that with a pinch of salt, but it appears that it's credible.
Yeah.
It's shocking. The government and local authorities have a duty of care to safeguard these children. And the Daily Mail is saying up to 100 have gone missing. I think this story is going to get bigger.
Yeah.
And questions asked, and whether there may be charges brought against individuals who have failed to safeguard these people.
I must say, I did a report on as a Holiday Inn, well, it used to be a Holiday Inn anyway, in Maidenhead, and I went to just check it out one day, and I could walk in and walk around it and walk out of there on a post. And if I was, that way inclined, I could have nicked a child, or, well, I could have done anything, really. I could have burnt it down, actually, if I really wanted to have done that. I mean, for me, I'm amazed that more of this hasn't happened. I do suspect that more of it is going to come to light. I mean, whether or not people think that these hotels should exist in the first place, the fact is that a lot of them are just not secure.
Look, is a British child valued in the same way as a refugee child? That's the question. If a British child went into care and the local authority put them in a hotel without any supervision at all, we think that's right. And yet, nothing's happened. I mean, the police should have been letting the public know these children are missing. I mean, you would have expected the police to give these notices out to try and find these children.
It is a bit odd.
Yeah. So when a British child goes missing, it's plastered everywhere that a child has gone missing. And yet 100 refugee children are supposedly gone missing, and nobody's been told about it. And there are, the Daily Mail says that some of them may be trafficked or maybe going into...
Well, undoubtedly, yeah.
So it's a shocking, and I think this story will get really big.
I do think that story is going to get really big, and there's lots of different elements to it. And in fact, I am going to be covering this a bit later on. I'm in covering for Dan Wootton tonight, by the way. So I'll be doing that 9 o'clock until 11, and we're going to go quite big on this very story as well. Lots of different elements to it, of course, so we'll get stuck into that. Ivan, thank you very much. Great to have you in the studio. Great to see you. Ivan Sampson there, specialist immigration lawyer. What do you make of that? Very contentious issue, of course. Again, if you're just just joining us, I'll give you a quick whiz through, which is, of course, it's in the High Court. Yes, that's right, appeal number 2 when it comes to whether or not we can actually deport people or send people for processing, if you want to put it that way, to Rwanda. Where do you stand on this? The appeal hinges on 2 separate things, which is whether or not the process itself is fair, can we process asylum seekers in just 3 weeks, which is what they want to do, and whether or not we actually should be sending them to Rwanda at all, i.e. is Rwanda a safe country? I've got to be honest with you, if Rwanda is not as safe as Albania, I can't understand why we're not just sending some people back to Albania, but there we go. GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, coming up. Latest NHS waiting times are out today, and in fact, they're out of control. They're not just out today, hitting a record 7 million people across the UK. This is absolutely bonkers, ladies and gentlemen. 7 million people unable to get routine care at the NHS. Is there any chance this backlog will be cleared? I'll be back in a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Absolutely shocking story, this, people. The number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has reached a record high. We all knew it was coming, but now it's here, and I fear this is not the worst of it. 7 million people were waiting at the end of August. That's up from 6.8 million in July, and it is the highest number since records began in 2007. It's starting to look like those predictions that we might end up peaking at around 12 million people could well be true. Meanwhile, the number of people waiting more than a year has now reached 387,000, and the government and NHS England say that they want to eliminate all waits of more than a year by March 2025. Well, good luck with that, the way things are going. I am joined now by Dr. Leah Croucher, who is an A&E doctor and author of Your Health in Our Hands. Thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show. It's actually the first time I've seen you sat down. The only other times I've seen you when you've been in here in person, and you are absolutely huge. So now it's nice to be at exactly the same height as you. So there we go. Thank you very much for coming onto the show. Look, this is... This is pretty bad, right? 7 million people, and presumably only going to get worse. How bad do you think this could get?
Honestly, it's more than pretty bad. It's terrible, because when you look at some of the targets that we set ourselves in the NHS, obviously we set ourselves very high targets when it comes to patient care. In terms of, for me as an A&E doctor, we have targets of seeing a certain amount of patients as a percentage within 4 hours of coming into the hospital, making a planned decision and treatment. That should be around 95%. However, it's fallen to about 71% on average. And when you look at in GP centres in terms of 2-week wait referrals, now these are referrals that when we think there may be a suspected cancer in a patient who presented in the GP and we need an urgent diagnostic test, this should be about 93%. And again, this is around 70%. So it's not great at all. And what I fear is this could get a little bit worse before it gets better.
So
however, there are plans in action to hopefully
just to clear something up for me, right?
Change things.
Just to clear something up for me, because 7 million people currently on an NHS waiting list for, as far as it says, routine treatment. So what is a routine treatment? Is it stuff like a hiatus hernia? Is it things like if you've done your ligaments in your ankle or a dodgy hip? What's the cut-off point for routine?
So a routine clinic is what we consider something elective. So, for example, an elective operation. So if you have a hernia that's not life-threatening or completely debilitating and you're on an elective list for a general surgery, or if you have, for example, bad osteoarthritis in the hip and you're on an elective orthopedic list for a hip replacement, these are what we call elective lists. Or if you have like an elective clinic where you need to see a diabetic consultant about diabetic medication or control. These are elective clinics and operations, and these are what's waiting, because at the moment we prioritize the emergencies. So all these different surgeons and consultants in their different specialties will be prioritizing emergencies that come into A&E. For example, we prioritize a broken hip from somebody who's fallen. We prioritize that treatment for more than we would an elective hip for somebody who has osteoarthritis, because it can wait. It doesn't sound good saying patients can wait, but there's a hierarchy. And even when it comes to ambulances, because obviously the ambulance call-out times have also been something that's come up more. More people are calling ambulances for more urgent calls, and the times for wait for ambulances are growing.
Well, there are more people as well, is the thing as well. You know, our population is growing by the day. But just on this now, there's a recruitment crisis apparently in our NHS. There's not enough staff and not enough resources, and a lot of the staff that are in it want more money. So one of the things that I'm hoping you might be able to clear up for me, right, is if you're being honest, if we paid the existing staff more money, do you think we'd start seeing waiting times go down? Or actually, do we need more staff as well as to pay our current staff more money?
I think both. I think, obviously, financial incentives are going to keep people from leaving the NHS. We've had a record number of young people, especially nurses, leaving the NHS to go to different professions or taking their skills to other places such as Canada, United States and Australia for better working life and for better pay. If we incentivize them financially, obviously this is going to keep people from leaving, which is going to give us more workforce, which is obviously going to help waiting times. But then you have the other part of the argument where you actually have to drive people to actually want to be in the NHS. And we've done a great program with filling spots with physician associates and other healthcare practitioners, which are aiding doctors and nurses to fulfill their jobs and helping. And we have seen a general improvement in 18-month wait. So it's not all doom and gloom. We are seeing improvements slowly and surely. But the main thing is to urge to the public that this may get worse before it gets better, especially coming up to winter. And it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I suspect it is. And rather depressingly, very often in this job, I read predictions, forecasts, whether it's political polls or whatever. They're almost always wrong. However, the numbers that we've hit now, which is 7 million people waiting for routine treatments in the NHS, these were predicted, and so if the other stuff is true as well, we could even hit 10 or 12 million, which, fingers crossed, we don't, but we almost definitely will. Emeka, thank you very, very much. Emeka Croucher there, who is an A&E doctor and author of Your Health in Our Hands. Right, goodness gracious me, what do you make of that, people? Rather shocking stuff there, ladies and gentlemen, but GB News Live is with me, Patrick Christys, and coming up, the Justice Secretary says that transgender prisoners with male genital men should no longer be held in women's prisons. Men shouldn't be in women's prisons. There you go. I cannot believe that we've had to have our Justice Secretary tell us that fully grown men with male genitalia, the whole caboodle, should not be in women's prisons. That's right. Brandon Lewis also claimed the reforms to policies on where to house inmates will also apply to transgender women who have been convicted of a sex offence. We'll discuss all of that utter nonsense very shortly after the headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. The Chancellor is insisting his focus is on delivering the mini-budget amid reports the government's about a U-turn on the economic plans announced just under 2 weeks ago. It's after some Tory members of the 1922 committee urged Prime Minister Liz Truss to reconsider Kwasi Kwarteng's fiscal plans. The Bank of England has intervened twice to stabilise the markets following his budget. However, that support comes to an end tomorrow. The High Court's hearing a second challenge against the government's plan to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. The government says the measures would reduce the numbers of migrants making the dangerous journey across the English Channel, but critics are concerned by Rwanda's human rights record. Asylum Aid, the charity mounting the legal challenge, say tight timescales lead to unfairness and are impacting on people's ability to access justice. A jury in the States is recommending life in prison for a gunman who killed 17 people in a school shooting in Florida in 2018. Nicholas Cruz, who was 19 at the time, used a semi-automatic weapon at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. He pleaded guilty to the murder of 14 of his fellow students and 3 members of staff. The NHS is still appealing for blood donations from people with the O-type blood, following a critically low shortage of supplies. It says thousands of people have signed up to donate in response to an Amber Alert over low stocks, but a lack of staff has limited how many donor sessions can run. Most donation appointments are booked this week, but people with O-type blood or O-negative or O-positive will get priority. That's it. You're up to date with the latest news headlines on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. We're back in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. Police have appealed now for the public for help after launching their murder investigation following the disappearance of 19-year-old Leah Croucher in 2019. Human remains were found at a house less than half a mile from where she was last seen around Milton Keynes, and forensic experts are now scouring that property. Thames Valley Police have acknowledged that the house was not searched in their initial investigation back in 2019. Well, we can now cross live to Milton Keynes to speak again to GB News' reporter Jack Carson, who is outside the property. Jack, thank you very, very much. What's the latest where you are, please?
Well, the latest is that the community is starting to come together here in Milton Keynes, and just a short while ago, family of Leah Croucher here laid a wreath and flowers at the memorials. I'll read you that message that the family left on that wreath. Our beautiful darling Leah, while our hopes and dreams to find you safe and well have been stolen from us, a new hope for answers in justice is now part of our path to fight ahead. We promise you with all our hearts we will never ever give up fighting for you. And the flowers from her nan and granddad read, we will never stop seeking answers. We'll love and miss you always. Now, a statement from the Thames Valley Police a couple of hours ago said that they're dealing with a difficult and challenging scene and are conducting investigations thoroughly and with dignity, ensuring that all our actions are carried out in a respectful manner. And a Home Office post-mortem examination is expected to take place tomorrow on Friday, although this may take some time, as will the formal identification of the deceased person located inside the property. Of course, Leah Croucher went missing on the 15th of February in 2019, and that started a 3.5-year-long investigation where police reviewed over 1,200 hours of CCTV footage, made door-to-door inquiries over 4,000 homes, but it wasn't until they received a tip-off on Monday about the property behind me that they've now made this discovery of human remains, as well as Leah Croucher's rucksack and other personal possessions found at the property. The head of crime for Thames Valley Police, Detective Chief Superintendent Ian Hunter, said that if anyone had any information which may be relevant to the case, please get in touch with the Thames Valley Police. He said, I appreciate the passage of time that has passed, but we remain hopeful that somebody may have a crucial piece of information, particularly given this significant development today, and Leah's family continue to be kept informed about all those developments.
Thank you very much. Jack Carson there, who is outside that property in Milton Keynes, where very sadly human remains have now been found. Well, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the news that 7 million people are waiting for treatment on the NHS. Andrea says it's terrible. This week, I've been in and out of the GP and hospital. Initially, I was told that I had a urinary tract infection. Thanks for sharing. Got worse, so I went to hospital. A junior doctor said it was pelvic inflammatory disease. Then his senior registrar turned around and said it couldn't be that. For 3 days, I was told to put up with it and just take antibiotics. I've only ever noticed bad problems with the NHS. Look, first and foremost, Andrea, very, very sorry to hear all of that. But that is, unfortunately, I suspect, a bit of a nutshell as to where we are at. I don't know about you all watching this at home. I hope everything sorts itself out, by the way, Andrea, and you get the care that you want and indeed need. And also this business of the NHS being free at the point of use. It's not free. We're flipping paying for it, aren't we, with our taxes? Anyway. Philip said, when I visited hospital to see my daughter, who was in late stages of breast cancer... Oh, gosh, sorry about this, Philip. The nurses were all chatting around a desk doing nothing, sorting it out. That must be awful. So sorry. No one should have to go through that, certainly not a parent as well, which, you know, if it's going to happen, it should happen really the other way around. That's the kind of natural order of things, isn't it? Terribly sorry to hear that. Michael says, I'm an 87-year-old gent, good on you, Michael, who has had a series of illnesses in the last 4 years. This includes cancer. I've had treatment in both private hospital and NHS hospitals. I can assure you the difference is pronounced. Staff attitude and the general deployment of staff, wastage of materials, to my mind, is appalling. As an individual who's worked at board level in major public companies, I can assure you that it is simply bad management in the NHS, not a shortage of money. And it is fascinating stuff. I do understand that, obviously, you know, things rise, the costs of things rise. However, we have never pumped more money into our NHS than we have done right now. And at what point do we have to say that money has to be spent a bit better? Michael, thank you for your time. And I hope that the last 4 years of, by the sounds of it, of unrelenting illness managed to sort itself out. And you are on the right path to a good, healthy life. Michael, great to have you on the show. GB Views at gbnews.uk. That is that story. 7 million people now on an NHS waiting list for treatment. That number, ladies and gentlemen, will rise sharply. We are predicting it has been predicted, I should say, that it could rise to around 12 million, which is staggering when you think about the scale of our population, which is something like 68 million. OK, so it's bad, OK, really, really bad. And what needs to be done about it? Because I'm just starting to wonder now, instead of just pumping money into this bottomless pit that is our NHS, at what point will somebody go, OK, wholesale root and branch reform, let's go for some kind of semi-privatised system? Or do we have to suck it up and just go, you know what, we're going to have to pay people through the nose here to work in our NHS because the health of our nation depends on it? Your views, GB Views at gbnews.uk. But the government is to stop male prisoners who say that they are not male anymore, still men, from being held in women's prisons. Right, so the Justice Secretary, Brandon Lewis, has expressed that transgender prisoners with male genitalia, men, should no longer be in women's jails. Instead, they'll go to a prison that is in accordance with their biological gender, a male prison. Last week, Lewis told delegates at the Conservative Party conference it cannot be right that transgender prisoners, when convicted of serious sexual offences or those who have not had reassignment surgery, are housed in a general women's estate. This will end. We have a duty of care to all of those behind bars. It's my pleasure now to say that I'm joined by Dr. Kate Coleman from the Keep Prison Single Sex Campaign. Great to see you, Dr. Kate. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for coming on the show. This surely is a step in the right direction and hopefully an end to the utter madness of men, presumably some of them even sex offenders, being put in women's prisons.
Well, it's definitely a step in the right direction, but unfortunately it's not going to see an end to male prisoners being held in the female prison estate. I mean, as a ministerial statement that the current prison policies are not working for women in prison, that they're not keeping women in safe, and that more needs to be done, it really is extremely significant and it's important. And of course, this comes after recent news reports of serious incidents in the female estate involving 2 male prisoners, one of whom was serving a sentence for murder and had intact and functioning male genitalia, and one serving a 20-year sentence for multiple serious child sexual offences. So this is important and it is definitely a step in the right direction. But if you look at the statement, it's limited to prisoners with intact male genitalia and or those convicted of sexual offences. It isn't a blanket rule. It says quite clearly in the statement that exceptions will be considered on a case-by-case basis.
Should the case, should the case just be, does this case include someone with full male genitalia? And if the answer to that is yes, then they shouldn't be there.
Well, I mean, my opinion, no male prisoner should be there. You know, the fact that somebody no longer has functioning or intact male genitalia doesn't mean that they're safe around women. And doesn't mean that they should be in a single-sex space for women. Ditto the fact that someone isn't serving a current sentence for a sexual offence certainly doesn't make them safe around women. What about violent offenders? You know, we know of male prisoners who've been convicted of serious violent offences against women in prison, against women who are held in the female prison estate. And that, you know, we need to see how will this translate into policy, and then how will that policy be implemented in practice? There are many questions that we still need to ask. You know, what about the violent offenders? What if someone has a history of sexual offending, but their current conviction is for something else? How will this interact with gender recognition certificates? It also, I note, says that they should not be held in the general female population. So will parts of the female population now be siphoned off, and resources which should go towards women in prison will be allocated to house these male prisoners still in the female estate, but separately? There's lots of questions that we just still don't know the answers to.
Do you ever wake up sometimes and just bang your head a bit and think maybe I am living in a clown world now, where some politicians appear to be making decisions without any logical basis whatsoever, based, by the way, can I just say, on almost no vote winners. I think the number of people who would vote for a political party because they allow transgender men to run riot in female prisons, presumably would just be the transgender men who are in female prisons, which is, OK, a concerning amount of people, but not enough to win you an election, right? Do you not think this is just mad?
Well, it is mad, and sometimes, you know, I know all of us who are involved in these sorts of campaigns, sometimes you do wake up in the morning and you think, come on, I must have dreamt all this. This can't honestly be happening. But yes, when you take prisons and you take hospital wards and you take schools and you take the medicalisation of children and you take changing rooms in Primark and toilets and sports, female sports, when you take all of these things, you just think this is insane. And you're right, it's not in and of themselves. These are not vote winners.
And actually, does it play? I'm wondering about this because if this was me, and it's tragically because I unfortunately don't necessarily see it ending anytime soon. I hope it does, and I wish it will. I have got a massive, massive concern that if I ever have a daughter growing up, I'm going to have some very, very uncomfortable conversations at school. They won't be uncomfortable for me. They'll be uncomfortable for the teachers who are on the other end of it, don't get me wrong. But I don't see this ending anytime soon. And if something happened to a hypothetical daughter of mine at the hands of someone who was, you know, one of these people, I would be so angry. I think I'd completely lose it. So presumably you, as a woman, must be particularly angry about this as well. And I'm wondering as well, do you ever feel as though whenever people do lose their minds about this and just lose it, as I would, do you get that old trope of, you're just being hysterical? You're just being hysterical. It's actually, no, I'm very, very angry about this because I've got a right to be angry about it. I'm just wondering if you almost can't win.
Well, exactly. I mean, the accusations of overreacting or being shrill or, you know, homophobic, that kind of gets tacked on as well, or fueled by bigotry or right wing. These come all the time. And I think another question you say, you know, about losing it if something happened to your daughter, and God forbid anything like that would ever happen to a child, but we know sadly it does. You know, you keep thinking, what is going to be the thing that's going to kill this? Is it a woman in prison getting sexually assaulted? Well, no, it's not, because that's happened and it didn't stop things. You know, is it children being medically transitioned? Well, no, because that happened and that didn't stop it. You know, is it women and girls getting sexually assaulted in what should be single-sex toilets or changing rooms? Well, no, because that happened and that didn't stop it. Is it medal opportunities or, you know, competitive opportunities at a high level, at the elite level, being taken by male athletes over female athletes? Well, no, that didn't stop it, because that's also happened. You know, is it a woman getting seriously injured in a contact sport with a male athlete? Well, no, because that happened and it didn't stop it. So, you know, you do keep thinking, what is it actually going to take for this to end and for common sense to start ruling again? And I agree with you. I don't think this is ending anytime soon. You know, I think that the arguments against this, which, you know, are based in rationality and evidence and science and logic, those are now being heard. And I think as the general public wakes up to this more, they certainly don't support this. You know, you've only got to read the comments under the line in news articles, whether it's Telegraph, Times, Mail, Sun, Mirror, whatever it is. And most people, the overwhelming majority, think this is insane and they're opposed to it.
They do, but you know what's absolutely amazing? Because you're spot on. The overwhelming majority absolutely do. And if there was a secret ballot on this or a referendum on this, the numbers would be staggering. But unfortunately, and I have found out to my peril, I sometimes go out and vox pop the nation, and there's a bit of canal near some of our studios here, and you just know that people don't think this stuff is right, but you put a camera in their face, like, oh yes, I think we should let anyone be anyone else, because they're terrified of essentially the trans mafia who get involved and start a hound. They'll find out where you live, they'll find out where you are online, they'll do all of this stuff, and they'll make your life miserable because essentially you think that men are men and women are women, which is absolutely Staggering, but I agree with you finally, Kate, on this one. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say to you, yes, I think you made a series of very good points there, and I really hope the day doesn't come where something utterly, utterly, utterly terrible happens and you and I have to have that chat and we play this conversation back and that's what it took for something to change. Kate, thank you very much. Dr. Kate Coleman there from the Keep Prison Single Sex campaign. Thank you very much for that. Right, up next is Jubes & Co with Michelle Dewberry, who's right here in the studio. What you got coming up, Michelle?
Hello, Patrick. Yes, I'm here. I was excited. I wanted to hand over with you yesterday, by the way, because you had a great story yesterday. Do you remember that one where that lady had been scammed out of all that money?
Yeah.
A fella that wanted to be brought back from space. Do you remember that story?
I do, yes.
I was watching. I was desperate to hand over with you because I was on the complete opposite side of that. There's some fellas that I know that I would have paid all that money to send them to space, Patrick. And I didn't get the chance to hand over with you, so I never got to tell you the end of that story. Anyway, coming up tonight on my show, politics. What a day of it. The fallout from the not-so-mini budget continues, apparently. MPs are now starting to file letters of no confidence in Liz Truss. People are saying the Chancellor should survive. One Tory MP tweaking the definition of confidence. I mean, what are this lot doing to themselves, Patrick? You don't even need an opposition, do you? Also, universities. Now there's suggestions that universities could be fined if a majority of their students don't get good graduate jobs at the end of it. Is that a good idea or not? And also, I want to talk to you about what I think is a bit of a war on motorists, Patrick, because everywhere you look, it seems to me that motorists are being penalised, and also not so subtle shifts to get people out of their cars, whether it's low-traffic neighbourhoods, cycle lanes, you name it. So I'll be looking at that as well.
Yeah, spot on, Michelle, as ever. Thank you very much. It's going to be a top-draw show. Make sure you tune in for Jubes & Co. That'll be coming your way, right about now. Oh, I'll see you later, by the way. I'm covering for Dan Woodson tonight, 9 o'clock until 11, so I better get some dinner. I'll see you back in the studio soon.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Many places having a fine day today. There will be sunny spells over the next few days, but there's also going to be bands of showers whizzing through on a fairly brisk breeze, particularly across northern areas. A couple of weather fronts moving in tonight. These ones close to the south as well, but say most places have been between these weather systems today. So it's a fine evening for many. But the cloud and rain is pushing in across the central belt of Scotland, and then another line of rain coming into the Highlands and across Northern Ireland through the night. A few showers likely across Wales and southwest England, but much of England and Wales is having a dry night. Not as chilly as last night. We'll easily drop down into single figures in some towns and cities, but many places staying well above freezing. Certainly, as I said, a lot milder than last night. As we go into Friday, it's a bit of a mess, really. Lots of cloud in the south with outbreaks of rain working their way from west to east. At the same time, a line of rain spreading from southern Scotland into northern England. Behind that, plenty of heavy showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but some